Hello hunters, welcome back to Super Fan Natural. Guys, I have a quick question for you. It should be really easy to answer, no problem whatsoever. Where did God come from? In the show Supernatural, of course. I'm not talking about the real world, because that's like 7 different super spicy topics that I'd rather avoid. No, in the television show Supernatural, who created the creator? Where did he come from? What came before him? And what is he? Supernatural takes heavy inspiration from the Abrahamic mythology, with the universe, well, universes, being created by a single, super powerful entity who goes by a few names, but mostly goes by God and later Chuck Shirley. However, unlike Abrahamic myth, this isn't where the story begins, as we're actually given information about what God was doing before he created anything. Now, this is one of the most confusing tidbits in the entire series, as it's recounted by multiple people, and each time it's just a little bit different. One detail that comes up over and over again, especially in later seasons, is that while God may or may not be the top dog in terms of age and power, there are at least 3 other beings who came into existence around the same time as him. First, we have the Darkness, God's destructive sibling, who later goes by the name Amara. Next, we have the Shadow, the personification of the empty, a void outside of creation. Finally, there's Death, who's, well, death. Over the course of the series, these 4 each give an account of who came first. The first insight that we get into the beginning was from Death, who states that he's as old or older than God, and that neither of them really remember who came first anymore. Later he claims that the darkness predates God, and that it's more powerful than him, though weirdly he doesn't explain where God came from or what he himself was doing while the darkness was still around. Death also specifically claims that before God and the darkness, there wasn't nothing, which is important. Next we hear from the Darkness, in the form of Amara, who over the course of Season 11 recounts how she and God existed together, opposite in nature but equal in power, and that they had no parents, there was nothing before them, they just were and always have been. She doesn't know who Death is, nor does she acknowledge the existence of the empty. It's important to note that while God may or may not be able to influence and manipulate Death and the Shadow, he doesn't seem to have such power over his sister, meaning that she's arguably the most trustworthy source about the beginning. In the final season, it's revealed that Chuck and Amara actually weren't always siblings. At one point, they were actually one unified being that split into 2. They ultimately return to a version of this state, so that Chuck can undo reality. Well, actually, it's more like he eats Amara, since his personality remains dominant in the end. Finally, we have the Shadow, and this thing makes some pretty lofty claims. It states that it, or at least the empty, not only predates the other 3, but also exists outside of their power. The latter claim is ultimately revealed to be untrue, as God is somehow able to pull things out of the empty, though the Shadow states that that shouldn't be possible, implying that there may have been some hacks going on. But also, the Shadow just is pretty unhinged, so maybe it's not the best source. Whatever the truth is, it ultimately leads to a series of events that everyone seems to agree on. God wants to create, but Amara won't let him, so he creates the 4 archangels, and together they seal the darkness away, leaving her alive but almost powerless. He couldn't kill her because both God and the darkness must exist at the same time. If only one of them is destroyed, then, well, we actually really don't know. But according to God himself,
there's a harmony, a balance in the universe. Light needs dark, dark needs light. If you blow one of them up, then,
it wouldn't be a good thing.
It'd be really not a good thing. Like, end of reality, not good.
So how do we make sense of this story? Who's correct and who's telling a big lie? In this video and a few others, I'll explain my theory, which not only explains which of these cosmic critters came first, but also where they came from and what they are. Now, admittedly, that includes a lot, and I mean a lot, of speculation and a little philosophy, but I think I've come up with a story that makes at least a little bit of sense. Here it goes. In the beginning, there wasn't anything, but there also wasn't nothing.
What?
It's confusing, I know, but I promise it'll make a little bit of sense later. Basically, the original state of reality is one in which nothing real or concrete exists, but there's a potential for things to exist that permeates the blank canvas of reality. Basically, things don't exist, but they could. It might seem like I'm pulling that out of my luscious rear, but not quite. Check out this exchange from Season 11.
There's a value, a glory in creation that's greater and truer than my pride or my ego. Call it grace, call it being, whatever it is, it didn't come from my hands. It was there, waiting to be born. It just is, as you and I just were.
Admittedly, that can be interpreted a few different ways, but to me, that says that God doesn't create for the fun of it. I mean, he does enjoy it, but at his core, he's driven by some underlying fundamental aspect of existence, a vast potential for things to be that uses his power in order to manifest in as many ways as possible. He didn't create it, and it didn't create him. He's always been a part of it, existing as the potential's, for lack of a better word, will or desire to take shape and be realized. He's not its only desire, however. Part of it, quote-unquote, wants to take various forms, yes, but part of it also wants to remain formless and unified, still existing, but only as peaceful, untapped potential. As I'm sure you've guessed, that desire would eventually become Amara. These desires did start as two hypothetical parts of the same immaterial whole, but that couldn't last. Their opposite natures caused friction, and this equal strength meant that neither could win. Ultimately, this caused them both to manifest as sentient forces, separate from each other and each with their powers to shape the potential in ways that fit their nature. Also, because there were now two things that actually definitively existed, it meant that non-existence was now officially a separate thing. In a sense, non-existence now existed. Are you still with me? I know, it's a lot of weird concepts, but from here, it should make a little bit more sense. So here we are. God and Amara separated and capable of setting up existence however they want. God's plan is easy enough to understand. He's a creative force. He wants to make the world filled with unique and interesting things. Chuck himself describes his desire to create the multiverse as catching the bug, which to me reinforces the idea that his creative drive comes from a deeper level. On the other hand, Amara claims that the real reason God created things was to make lesser beings that he could lord over. And he actually agrees that this was part of it, which doesn't really line up with what I've been saying, right? Well, there's a reason. The God twins are often compared to yin and yang, which makes sense, balance and all that. However, it's important to remember that the balance of yin and yang doesn't just come from having two parts in equal measure. No, an important part of the concept is that each half contains a small bit of the other within it. Likewise, I believe that when the twins split and manifested as separate things, they each took a little piece of the other with them. Basically, God has a little bit of darkness, and Amara has a little bit of light, and it's these little bits of opposing natures that cause them to be complex sentient beings instead of mindless forces like gravity. For God, this little bit of darkness gives him a sense of self and an ego, which, yeah, if unchecked can be a really big problem, but it also gives him a sense of taste. His creations mean something to him. It may not be something particularly important or positive, and he may abandon it out of boredom or disappointment, but at least there's some semblance of a purpose and intention. Without this sense of self and direction, there's a good chance that creation would end up as a cold Lovecraftian Cthulhu nightmare universe full of terrors of every shape and size, and devoid of any kind of mercy or hope. I mean, some of the universes are like that, but he keeps them separated from the ones with weak, squishy humans, so that they have at least a little bit of a chance to matter. But what about Amara? What's she all about? She's often referred to as a destructive force, but there's more to her than that. When given the opportunity to explain her beef with creation, Amara reveals that she destroys because she was hurt that her brother needed things other than her. She couldn't understand why things couldn't just be like they had always been, just her and God together. On another occasion, while talking to Lucifer, she states that she wanted solitude, and that she ultimately wanted to create a world with no suffering. By putting all of this together, you can see what she really wants, and it's not just wanton destruction. It's a world that's simple, unified, and peaceful. God is separate from her, but the two remain balanced and equal. However, as God creates, he fills existence with things that are separate from both of them. God can manipulate them in all manner of ways, and he can create things that are so loyal that defiance seems impossible, but ultimately, they can defy him. They can defy him to the point of taking his power and effectively replacing him. I mean, free will is kind of one of the core tenets of the series. Free will is great, but it comes with some drawbacks like exclusion, disparity, and conflict. These are the reasons why Amara destroys. It's not that she inherently hates creation or individuality or free will. She's just driven to prevent the negatives that come with these things. Also, when I say she destroys, I don't mean she just kills. I mean she reduces things to complete nothingness. Like when she crumples up Metatron here, I don't think that he goes into the empty. I think he well and truly does not exist anymore. She doesn't have to do that. She's capable of just regular killing. But if she hits you with her full dark power, then you're gone, and neither God nor death can bring you back. Not only can they not undo it, I also don't think that either are capable of completely erasing things the same way Amara can. I'll talk more about death in another video, but first, some of you are probably questioning the idea of God having such a limitation. I mean, he's God. He's the father of creation, and by the end of the series, he's also the destroyer of universes. Surely I'm mistaken. And to that I say, there's evidence. God does have the destructive power, including enough to wipe out entire universes, but he himself admitted that he needed Amara to completely start over. Also, while his claims about being powerless against Jack were a lie, he did seem genuinely afraid of him. However, when he finally went for the kill, Jack was just dead, not completely wiped out of existence. Think of it like this. Amara can revive the dead, but she can't create anything completely new. God has the opposite limit. He can destroy, but not completely erase. Normally that's not a problem. It's actually a key feature of balance. However, if one of the forces gets sealed away, like Amara was, well, you have the potential to run into a few problems. See, just like how God can't fully control his creations, he also doesn't necessarily fully understand them. For all his claims of omniscience, there's some things that don't really line up with his grand plan. The most obvious example is Jack, who literally breaks reality several times. We can argue about how big of a role God played in Jack's creation and actions, but one thing that we can all agree was not something that God ever wanted was for one of his creations to become immune to his powers. Even beyond that, there's the fact that theoretically, a normal person could, with the right know-how, kill one of the God twins and thus nullify all of existence. These things only become more likely as God creates more things, and those things create other things. The darkness provides a natural defense against this, but once she's sealed away, something else is needed to maintain any semblance of a natural order. But that's a topic for another video that I will make eventually. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know it's a little wordy and confusing, but I don't know, it's the kind of stuff I like to think about. If you like this, then why not stick around for a while? If you didn't, then good news. There's plenty of other topics that I'll cover on this channel, so again, stick around for a bit. I'll have more for you soon, but for now, fare thee well.